So, perfect. So Sterling has been pushing the boundary of autonomous vehicles for the better part of the last decade. At MIT, his work in shared autonomy led to the creation and subsequent distribution of Intelligent Copilot. In more recent years, Sterling led and launched the Model X program for Tesla, then served as the director of Autopilot there. In December, Sterling left Tesla to co-found a new self-driving enterprise with 2 other pioneers in the space. Thank you so much, Sterling, for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
So you've been thinking about autonomous vehicles for way longer than they've been in vogue in Silicon Valley. What sort of drove you to this area?
Yeah, no, it's been an exciting space for a while. So I've been involved for the better part of the last decade. I started some of my work on autonomous vehicles in about 2007. It was about the time of the DARPA Urban Challenge was really picking up steam. At that time, I joined Carl Janiema, Emilio Frazzoli, John Leonard, some of that crew at MIT. And it was clear that there was a bit of a disconnect between sort of how soon we'd have self-driving vehicles fully on the road versus the difference that we could make in the interim. And so we developed this technique that we called the Intelligent Copilot, which was effectively sort of an adaptive shared approach to autonomy, which was sort of something akin to what Toyota has recently announced with some of the Guardian Angel stuff, which is modulate control behind the scenes to avoid any accidents or losses of control, but allow the driver to drive for as long as their actions are safe. So that was some of the original work we did at MIT. We were very excited about some of the pickup that it got. We ended up working quite a lot with Ford and putting some of this technology on some of their vehicles. They took it. It was a bit of a sort of, it provided a bit smoother means of adoption via sort of a staged implementation in vehicles. And so working with them and with several others, we started to get it out. We then started to get very excited about where we could expand it in other industries, right? So DARPA had a program going on at the time wherein they were very interested in us applying similar techniques to unmanned ground vehicles, right? So these are vehicles that, similar to I think the question that was posed in the last session, if you are remotely piloting a vehicle and you've got a keyhole view and you lose a lot of the sensory cues that you would typically have as a driver, how do you overcome those with an autonomous system or a shared autonomous system? So we developed some technology for that. Started a company to sort of commercialize some of it. Took some time away at McKinsey, where I constantly found that I was pulled back into this industry with various players who were looking at spooling up companies in the space. So a few years ago, met with Tesla. They were interested in spooling up their own sort of self-driver assistance and autonomy programs. Joined Tesla to do that. Model X ended up being a bit bigger priority. I was asked to lead that until we launched it, took over Autopilot, and we developed Autopilot to where it is today, which was sort of an exciting time. Right,
so you've seen this space both from the academia perspective and you've seen the industry evolve and been a part of the industry. What are the interesting ways the industry has evolved, given where it was in the academic world many years ago?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's evolved quite a lot. And I'd probably partition the answer to 2 areas, right? So technologically, and then sort of the market, how the market's changed. So technologically, I think, in fact, the core premise of this conference is around some of the ways in which machine learning has really changed some of the techniques and the approaches that we use, right? So when I started this was a game that was all about sort of deterministic algorithms, right? I was modeling tire forces. I was figuring out sort of how exactly the vehicle would respond to various things. I wasn't using a ton of machine learning. Over the years, we found sort of as machine learning has developed, it's sort of started to subsume some elements of that, and you go from and in stages, right? So initially, it's sort of this, machine learning is applied specifically to the perception problem. You see it start to eat its way a little bit into the planning problem, a little bit of the controls problem. So I think technologically, it's been a gradual blurring of the lines between what needs to be deterministic and what doesn't have to be. On the market side, I've seen, so my co-founder, Chris Urmson, and I find this a little bit, it's a curious evolution, and I refer to it as sort of the automotive stages of grief in autonomy, right? So years ago when I was starting this work at MIT, I would characterize the general mindset amongst those best suited to address the problem as one of car sharing is probably not really going to be a thing, and autonomy, it might be a niche thing, but we've got it. It's not a big deal. In fact, I had one who is a luminary now in this space, or at least perceived as such quite broadly, tell me at one point that car sharing was, quote, stupid, and that it would never be a thing. I think the second stage of grief was a general acknowledgement, and I think some of the car sharing networks today have really started bringing this to the fore, that car sharing will be a thing, and that autonomy is probably also going to play a big role, but we've got this. And then I think the latest stage of grief, which I would say much of the industry entered maybe a year or 2 years ago, was that of, wow, car sharing is going to be, and mobility services are going to be huge, autonomy is huge, and we definitely don't have this problem solved, right? And so I think we're now in this phase where I think we have a healthy acknowledgement that this is an extraordinarily challenging problem to solve. It's an extraordinarily important one, but we've now got so much effort and intensity sort of focused on it that I'm excited for where it goes.
Do you think that evolution in people's understanding or being supportive of this technology is something that's just sort of how technology evolves over time, or has there been a social change that makes autonomous vehicles more acceptable?
Yeah, unclear to
Okay.
me. Unclear. I think I'm a little bit less concerned about the sort of public perception of autonomy as a barrier. I suppose I'm so deep in the sort of technical development of it that I see that as the primary challenge. I think it's so easy and so quick for people to become comfortable with a technology that makes your life so much better that I'm a little bit less concerned about that. I think we hit one such hurdle, at least in terms of public perception, last summer. I think as a society we came through that in a way that I think was encouraging to me. I think we'll continue to see that not be quite as much of the barrier. I think the technology development is really the key, the problem we have to solve.
Cool. So going on to then what you're doing with Aurora, what's your goal and hopes with your new company? Yeah,
no, it's a great question. So this, if I were to characterize sort of the self-driving space in a graphic for you, it would probably be sort of a three-dimensional surface that's pockmarked all over the place with local minima, right? Small pockets wherein if you come at this problem from one of many different approaches, you will iteratively find your way to the center of one of those local minima, and at the end of the day, likely find yourself unable to get out without a drastic change to the architecture of the approach. Put another way, the solution space is full of so many paths, many of which have dead ends, or are so extraordinarily difficult to get to the end goal. By the time you're all the way down the road, it can be very difficult to get there. And so the goal of Aurora was, the world of 2017 is very different from the one of 2007 when I started this, right? The approaches are different. I've seen many of the techniques that I and Chris and some of the other folks at Aurora have used sort of find their way into various local minima, or at least see sort of where we think the global solution lies. And so the goal of Aurora was to pull together sort of a uniquely experienced team, right? The leaders of some of the world's largest and most influential self-driving programs, together with those who have, so the principal investigator who led the haul truck project, which is now operating autonomously in mines in Australia, which is one of the first commercial applications of autonomy. The co-creator of ROS. So some of these sort of folks who have worked in this space and seen many of the nuances of the problem. Our goal was to make autonomy broadly available with a team that was well positioned to do that quickly. And so that's kind of what Aurora is doing.
What is the major technical challenge you see with Aurora?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. At Aurora, we're focusing on sort of the three, if I were to categorize sort of the I guess, subsets of the problem of autonomy. We're working on the hardware, the software, and the data service, and all three have to be in place to do this right. On the hardware side, we're seeing a pretty significant evolution in the sensors that are available, right? And I think in the coming, next couple of years, we'll see a big step change there. And we're working on designing some of that. On the software side, that's where obviously a large chunk of this problem will be solved, and there we're obviously developing many of the algorithms and the approaches and the techniques. We'll be using the data services obviously to support some of the software. So the challenges coming down the pipe, I think we generally recognize the perception and forecasting problems as some of the most challenging. Once you understand well the world, you can better reason about what to do in it. And so I think that's kind of where I think a lot of the focus will be on a lot of the sort of perception, machine learning, and the sensors that you need to get the appropriate picture of what's happening around you.
Very cool. Good luck with that. Well, I just want to ask you one more question. There's a lot of people in the audience who either want to get into this space as entrepreneurs or engineers. Do you have any advice for them in particular, given that you've been a part of the industry for so long? Sure.
Yeah. Jump in. Water's fine. I guess it's an exciting space, an exciting time. When we're losing over 3,000 people a day to traffic accidents, there are a few problems this significant that can be solved. I would warn that, or I guess I would note that the autonomy problem is not yet solved. And so if you're concerned that you're too late, you're not. Anyone who tells you the autonomy problem has been solved, it probably doesn't understand it well enough. Autonomy is an active area of development, an active area of research. My co-founders and I have seen about as far as any programs have seen, and we still haven't seen the end of it. And so we're super excited to develop that. I think it's important to note that much of the challenge of autonomy and self-driving you will see at the tail end of the process. And so it's extremely important that you start off in the right direction with the right architecture, the right set of approaches, because typically you can take one of dozens of approaches to get yourself to an impressive demonstration, right? And we see those all the time, right? It takes a single graduate student with a single approach, and boom, you've got a car that goes on the road, and hallelujah, you raise some money.
Yeah.
It's important to note that the problems of autonomy don't surface at the start. They surface toward the end. They surface once you've gone so far down the path that you've taken that you realize, wait a second, this tail is so long, and my solution doesn't allow me either, one, to tailor specific elements of my technique to address it, or two, it turns out I don't have the sensors or the data that I need to make the right decision under this circumstance or that. And at that point, it becomes a question of, are you going to prune the sort of region of applicability of the solution space to only the subset of problems that you've been able to solve? Or are you going to throw that out and start from a clean slate? And so Aurora, what we're excited about is we are starting in 2017 knowing many of those sort of local minima and roadblocks, and attempting to solve this from a clean slate with the approach that we hope sort of gets us past sort of some of the pockmarks that we've run into in the past.
Thank you. That sounds very exciting. Good luck with Aurora. Thank you so much, Sterling.
Thanks.